Yo guys, what is going on? My name is Vexelate, but you could call me Nick, and today I'm bringing you UFC 273 predictions and breakdowns. I did this for my first card at UFC 272. I did pretty well. This fight card is pretty decent. It fell a little bit apart in my opinion when Dricus du Plessis, I believe his name is, and Kelvin Gastelum both lost their fights. At one point, they were going to fight each other, which I enjoyed because I like du Plessis is, a good up-and-comer. I've been watching him since the beginning of his career, and I'm always a Kelvin Gastelum fan. So then when Kelvin lost his fight and then they agreed to fight each other, I thought that was perfect. But then Kelvin withdrawed from that fight. That took a hit on the card, in my opinion. I was really looking forward to that fight. But we got 4 fights we're going to be breaking down here today, so let's just get right into it. As you can see, I have a predictions record from last video of 4-1. 4-1, good record. I'm hoping to keep something close to that this pay-per-view. First, we're going to do Ian Garry versus Darian Weeks. And I'll be honest, I don't know if Ian Garry should be this big of a favorite. Both of these men only have one fight in the UFC. Ian Garry won his first UFC fight by first round knockout. Darian Weeks lost his UFC fight, his first UFC fight, by decision. It was a full 3-rounder, wasn't a 5-rounder, obviously. Darian Weeks seems to be more of a grappler, while Ian Garry is obviously a kickboxer. Ian Garry gets hit quite a bit, though. If you look at his first fight, he was getting clipped, and he primarily got clipped down the middle. Just nice straights and crosses and jabs, really popping him. Also, whenever his opponent really blitzed him heavily, he seems to walk with his hands down. He backs up with his hands down very laterally, one direction. He doesn't really like jitter all over the place. It's very predictable where he's going to be going when he's backing up from strikes, and he usually has his hands down when he does that. Not a very good thing, not a good thing for his defense. Although he is 24, he's only 8-0. He's not an amateur. I was going to say he's a prospect. He's like an up-and-comer to the UFC. He can be something big. He's young, so he has time to perfect these things. Darian Weeks, he is a wrestler, I would say. He lost his first fight, like I said. Darian was going against Barberena, who he has actually very big fights in the UFC. Like, he's fought Leon Edwards before, he's fought Colby Covington, he's fought Vicente Luque, he's fought Sage Northcutt. So Darian Weeks' first opponent actually had big fight IQ. Maybe not fight IQ, but big fight experience. He kind of knows what to do better in the cage. Darian Weeks, obviously, I've said this a million times, he went to wrestle a lot. We don't really know what the takedown defense of Ian Garry is. He defended his takedowns in his first fight pretty well, but the guy he was going against wasn't really a grappler or anything like that. But he did seem to hold up well in the takedown defense department. He did very well in the clinch. In the clinch exchanges, Ian Garry was doing very good with the knees, things like that. So I do give him that edge in this fight. When Darian Weeks does shoot for a takedown, he seems to usually go for a single leg and drive it all the way to the cage, ending up in the clinch, which could be bad for him because Ian Garry is good at reversing that clinch, getting you against the cage, and then throwing knees to your body, knees to your head, things like that. Another thing I noticed about both Ian Garry and Darian Weeks is that they're both super susceptible to leg kicks. In both of their first UFC fights, they were both getting chopped up with leg kicks. Darian was getting a little bit worse though, and as a kickboxer, Ian Garry could definitely take advantage of that. Because Ian Garry threw tons of head kicks in his first UFC fight. Not too many of them landed, but he can, switch it up, throw body kicks, throw leg kicks. I know Darian Weeks is a grappler, he's a wrestler, but when he was getting all those leg kicks in his first fight, he wasn't even attempting to catch a single one of them. So I don't think Ian Garry really has to worry about things like that. Darian Weeks, when he isn't finding success in the grappling department, he seems to just kind of brawl with you, kind of just stand in front of you. He doesn't really back up. He doesn't really move forward, which is not good. If you're fighting Ian Garry on the feet, you kind of want to blitz him. Like I said, he backs up with his hands down, and he doesn't really expect you to add a punch or two at the end of your combos. That's how he was getting clipped in his first fight. So Darian Weeks, he does not have the striking advantage here whatsoever. He might have the slight grappling advantage, but I don't know if he's going to be able to land those takedowns. He shot 8 takedowns in his first fight in the UFC against Barberena, landed 4 of them, didn't really do too much of them though. Ian Garry, like I said, he's got 100% takedown defense in the UFC. It's really hard to find stats for fights outside of the UFC, so I couldn't find too much about that. But I expect Ian Garry to deal with the takedowns decently well, especially if they end up in the clinch. Darian Weeks doesn't seem to have the best cardio either. I know he took his fight against Barberena on short notice, but still at the end of that third, he looked tired. Meanwhile, Ian Garry's last fight outside of the UFC, 2 fights ago for him, was a full 5-rounder in which he won. So everything included, I do agree with the odds. I do expect Ian Garry to win. I expect maybe a late knockout. I don't see this fight going to decision. I do see Ian Garry maybe second, third round knockout, if not first, but I'm going to say later on. I don't expect this to go to decision whatsoever because every single one of Darian Weeks' wins has been by finish, and obviously Ian Garry has 2 decision wins, but I do expect him to knock Darian Weeks out. Darian Weeks did get clipped a little bit in that Barbera fight, so yeah, Ian Garry by knockout. I wanted to include this fight because if you guys don't know who Ian Garry is, now is a very good time to start paying attention. He was a Cage Warriors fighter. He is a Irish up-and-coming fighter, the next Conor McGregor allegedly. It's always fun to know about the prospects before they really blow up, so that's why I wanted to showcase this fight. So I'm going to go officially Ian Garry, second round knockout. And next, we get into the 3 main events. There's 3 main events. First, we're going to do the people's main event, Gilbert Burns versus Khamzat Chimaev. This is a crazy hard fight to predict. This is a classic case of, like, you know, the young, hungry, up-and-coming prospect, if you can even still consider Khamzat Chimaev to be a prospect at this point, versus, you know, the older, kind of towards the end of their career, but well-established, you know, very good fighter, veteran of the game, Gilbert Burns. I mean, just take a look at the records. Khamzat Chimaev, 10-0. Gilbert Burns, 20-4. And I'm sure we all know the stat of Khamzat Chimaev already being, what is it, 114-1 ratio of strikes, significant strikes landed to absorbed in his first 4 UFC fights. Very oddly specific stat, but still a very impressive one. He doesn't get hit, which is a good thing because Gilbert Burns has power, but that leaves us with very many unanswered questions. Does he have a chin? How does his chin hold up? Things like that. How does he do in a second round? How does he do in a third round? These are questions we do not have the answer to. There are so many unanswered questions that we just simply do not have the answer of because Khamzat Chimaev has such little in-cage time, you know what I mean? Khamzat Chimaev does have the advantage of being the bigger fighter, the younger, hungrier, I'd say debatably hungrier, up-and-coming fighter. And I think it makes sense for him to be the favorite just because we've seen him be so dominant, even if it is against lower tier opponents. Not that Li Jingliang is a low tier opponent or anything, but it's kind of hard to just like say, oh yeah, he's going to lose, you know, because we've only seen him be literally invincible looking. He's also got a 4-inch reach advantage. I think the biggest question of this fight is he going to try to take down Gilbert Burns like he did to Li Jingliang right in the beginning? Or is he going to try to stand strike with him? I think that's his key to victory. I think he has to stay and strike with Gilbert Burns because we know Gilbert Burns doesn't have the best chin in the world. Khamzat Chimaev can absolutely put Gilbert Burns to sleep with a punch. It can be done, no doubt about it. But is he going to try that? Or is he going to try to grapple with him? Which Gilbert Burns is very good with jiu-jitsu, obviously. Who doesn't know that? You know, he's very good at finding a limb. He's very good at working for something on the ground, you know, even if the opponent doesn't know it's coming. So that's where it gets tricky. Obviously, Khamzat Chimaev is going to have good, you know, submission defense, but is it going to be enough? We know that Khamzat Chimaev is primarily a wrestler, but do you really want to take down the jiu-jitsu guy, you know? I don't know. Maybe if he has intentions to just ground and pound, and you know, maybe that'll favor him, but I don't know. There's just so many unanswered questions here. Also, Gilbert Burns has knockout power. He can knock out Khamzat Chimaev. You know, we don't really know. We don't know a whole lot about Khamzat Chimaev from his UFC run yet. We don't know how is his striking defense. What does he do when he gets hit? What does he slip? Does he move his head a lot? Does he have a good guard? Things like that. I know he's had fights outside of the UFC that somewhat answer this question, but I don't even think they're comparable to help me answer this question because the competition of who he has fought and the competition in front of him today being Gilbert Burns is so drastically different that I don't know if they answer the question sufficiently. Or another good question is Gilbert Burns has 6 decision wins on his record. Khamzat Chimaev has 0. He's never gone the distance. How is Khamzat Chimaev going to look in that third round? He also had COVID not too long ago and was talking about calling it a career. So it must have hurt him bad. I had COVID It took me a couple weeks, and I know I'm not a UFC fighter. I know I'm not a professional athlete, but I do work out. It took me weeks to be able to even run like I used to be able to. I'm sure Khamzat Chimaev is fine, but then again, look at people like Amanda Nunes. She had COVID and then fought Juliana Pena and didn't look too good. She looked gassed by the end of the first. Is that going to happen to Khamzat Chimaev? Once again, we do not know. We just don't know. Is Gilbert Burns going to want to shoot on Khamzat Chimaev? I mean, Gilbert Burns is comfortable with shooting for takedowns. Look at what he did in the Stephen Thompson fight. He knew Stephen Thompson's like a very good karate kickboxer type guy. So what did he do? He took him down 3 times and, ground and pounded him and held him on the ground. Is he going to attempt to do that to Khamzat Chimaev? Can he take down Khamzat Chimaev, Or is he going to try to strike with Khamzat Chimaev? There is legitimately so many unanswered questions for this fight because Gilbert Burns isn't someone who's going to shy away from takedowns. He took down Tyron Woodley. He took down Stephen Thompson. But at the same time, he also didn't shoot for any against Kamaru Usman. Maybe that's because, he dropped him early in the fight and, thought he would have success on the feet. Who knows? So I know I'm not providing you with a whole lot of answers, probably just a bunch of questions, but let me summarize it. What does Gilbert Burns have going for him? He's got the fight experience. He's got the cardio. He's got the better jiu-jitsu. Things like that. I don't know what else he really has going for him though. He may succeed on the ground. His jiu-jitsu might help him beat the wrestler in Khamzat Chimaev. But what does Khamzat have going for him? Right now, he looks invincible, which I know isn't really a big factor in the cage, but maybe mentally going into the fight, it's going to help him, or it might hurt him. Here's another non-answer. Is Khamzat absorbing only 1 strike going to cause him to walk in here feeling invincible and then get cracked against Gilbert Burns? I don't think his fight IQ is that low. I think him teaming up with people like Darren Till and that whole camp, I think that's actually helping him a decent amount with his fight IQ, things like that. But take a look at what Khamzat Chimaev did to Li Jingliang, how he just picked him up like that. He can absolutely do that to Gilbert Burns. He can absolutely just get to the waist, pick him up, and walk him around the cage. Why not? He's 4 inches shorter than him, 4 inches shorter in reach as well. He can do that same exact picture with Gilbert Burns. Gilbert Burns should not be counted out. Gilbert Burns winning this fight is a very, very realistic possibility. These odds are absolutely ridiculous. This should be maybe Khamzat Chimaev minus 150 at the biggest, because Gilbert Burns is that veteran. He is that submission jiu-jitsu guy. He is the guy with the fight IQ and the experience and to our knowledge, the better cardio. It should not be a plus 375. But at the end of the day, I do have to favor Khamzat Chimaev. I really do. I just don't imagine him losing. Gilbert Burns, if Gilbert Burns had an iron chin, that would be very different. But Gilbert Burns does get hit, and when he gets hit hard, or even moderately hard, he cracked. He gets cracked, he crumbles. So I kind of see Khamzat Chimaev winning this by knockout. Probably round 1. I think he's gonna come out here crazy. So I'm going to go with Khamzat Chimaev round 1 knockout. Yeah, this could go any way though, but I'm hoping I'm right, obviously. Now we have the co-main event of the evening. This is so crazy to say, Aljamain Sterling defending his bantamweight title against the challenger Petr Yan. I know it's Petr Yan, but I'm just going to say Peter. I'm just going to say Yan just because it's easier and quicker. These odds are somewhat agreeable, but we should not forget that Aljamain Sterling is a legit fighter. I know he looked goofy in his last fight, and how he's acting outside of the cage and everything like that is making us want to count him out, but he is not just some bum off the street. He's not a can, and he's not someone to just be walked over. He is a legitimate contender. Well, technically, he's the legitimate champion. Well, if you want to get real technical, legitimate is disputable, but still, you get what I'm saying. Technically, Aljamain Sterling hasn't lost since 2017 in his fight to Marlon Moraes. What he did to Corey Sandhagen was very impressive. No one else has been able to do like that to Corey Sandhagen. TJ couldn't wrestle Corey Sandhagen like that. Jan couldn't wrestle Corey Sandhagen like that. Things like that. But, I'm gonna cut the illusion real quick. While Aljamain Sterling does have a chance, this is not a complete blowout. I think we all know that Petr Yan's gonna win this fight. I think we all know it. The only thing that Aljamain Sterling can improve upon in this fight is his cardio. He was gassing out towards the end of the third and in the fourth in their first fight, and I think that's what caused him to start looking so bad, start looking so sloppy, started getting taken down and hit just so easily. He knows that. He has to know that's an issue, and he has to be working on his cardio. If he doesn't come into this fight with better cardio, he might be screwed. He's looking really jacked on Instagram lately, which is actually a bad thing. That's going to cause him to gas out quicker. But I don't think Aljamain Sterling is trying to beat Petr Yan in a 5-round fight. I think Aljamain Sterling is trying to make this a 1 or a 2-round fight. I really think he is. I think he wants to get him down early and just end it quickly because he knows the later the fight goes on, the more data that Yan downloads, the harder it is going to be to beat him. Funny statistic is actually Aljamain Sterling only landed 1 takedown against Yan in their first fight, while Yan landed 7 on him, which I find absolutely hilarious because Sterling was 1 for 17 and takedowns in that first fight. So maybe that's why he's bulking up. Maybe he's like, okay, I got to take him down. I got to take him down early and I got to finish it with that takedown because he knows the later the fight goes on, the less successful his takedowns are going to be. Yan doesn't really get tired. Aljamain Sterling does. So I'm not going to drag this one for too long. Petr Yan's going to win. I think he's going to win by a decision, but Aljamain Sterling's got a chance. He has a chance. He knows what he did wrong in the first fight. He knows where he succeeded a little bit, if there was much. And he knows where he failed in that first fight, and he's got to be working on that in his camp. He's got smart people around him like Ally Quinta, people like that. He's not just hanging around with a bunch of bums. He's got to be working on himself. He's got to be working on the things he did wrong in that first fight. But I just don't think it's enough to beat Yan. I think Yan is the best bantamweight on the planet right now. And I think when, your primary fighting style of being a grappler, being a wrestler, being a submission guy doesn't work, when you go 1 for 17 in takedowns, when you get 7 for 7 against yourself in takedowns, I don't think there's much you can do in one camp in 1 year to make that big of a difference. So I got Petr Yan winning by decision. Last but not least, the main event, Alexander Volkanovski defending his featherweight championship against the Korean Zombie. Part of me wishes this was Max Holloway 3 still, but I'm kind of happy this is the Korean Zombie. Korean Zombie has looked pretty good since coming back in 2017. He's only lost twice. He lost once to Yair Rodriguez, which he was winning that whole fight. So, I mean, really, I would consider that almost a win. I don't think I know it's not a real win, but you can't look at that fight and be like, oh yeah, he was definitely losing that fight, because he wasn't losing that fight. He lost 1 second of that fight, that last second where he got knocked out. But he also had that Brian Ortega fight where he did just get outstruck the entire time and battered, But then let's take a look at Alexander Volkanovski. Last fight, I think, proved to people how legitimate Alexander Volkanovski is. I think the Alexander Volkanovski slander, I think the underrating of him is done now, because look at these odds. -720. That is insane. Let's take a look at the Korean Zombie. What does Korean Zombie have to do? He has 8 submissions in his career. He's not going to submit Volkanovski. Let's just be real. If anyone had a chance at submitting Volkanovski, it was Ortega. And while he did come close, he didn't actually do it. So I think this is going to be mostly a striking match. And Korean Zombie is a legit striker. But when you push the pace on him, he kind of just follows you around. He doesn't try to reverse the tides of a fight, striking wise at least. Dan Ige, he outstruck Dan Ige because Dan Ige kind of let Korean Zombie put his pace on the fight, put his dictation on the fight, if that makes sense. He let Korean Zombie lead the dance is the best way to describe it. But when someone comes out there, make sure they're the one leading the dance, metaphorically, Korean Zombie doesn't really have an answer. Best example of that is him versus Brian Ortega. Brian Ortega came out there with a very strict, very stern game plan on how to strike with him, how to push the pace, how to walk forward, and stuck to it. And Korean Zombie just couldn't figure anything out. Could not change the tide, could not make Brian Ortega take a back step. And I think basically the same thing is going to happen here with Alexander Volkanovski. Although Korean Zombie's jiu-jitsu is legit. He's the first twister submission holder in the UFC. That's nothing to gloss over by any means. Things like that. He's got some legit submissions. And you know what? I'll even say this. Alexander Volkanovski doesn't have an iron chin. He doesn't exactly get wobbled and cracked a whole ton, but he gets rocked. He gets dropped. He got dropped against Brian Ortega. He got dropped against Max Holloway, things like that. And Korean Zombie has Henry Cejudo, which, by the way, love him or hate him, Henry Cejudo is a legitimate coach. When he coaches someone, I've learned to be like, uh-oh. So, I don't know. Henry Cejudo being in the corner of the Korean Zombie gives the Korean Zombie a huge favorite, because Henry Cejudo has great fight IQ. He's a great grappler. He's a great wrestler. He beat Demetrius Johnson. You know, he beat TJ Dillashaw. He beat Dominic Cruz. He beat Marlon Moraes. He was doing great at the end of his career, and he seems to have translated all that skill into coaching, into teaching his skill to others, because every time he's in the corner of someone, that person does really well. So Korean Zombie having that in his back pocket is great. And Henry Cejudo did say that the game plan is to kind of, you know, brawl with Alexander Volkanovski. He says he wants to hit hard. He wants to get Alexander Volkanovski knocked out, which technically is a possibility. He does get hit. He does get dropped. Korean Zombie does hit hard. You know, he can land clean, things like that. But is Alexander Volkanovski going to let that happen? Is he going to let himself get hit? Obviously, he's going to get hit. That's not the question. The question is he going to get hit enough to where a point his chin cracks and he gets dropped by the Korean Zombie? Truthfully, I don't think so. I don't think Alexander Volkanovski is going to take the back step in this fight. He doesn't seem to do that. He didn't do that against Brian Ortega. He somewhat did that against Max Holloway in the second fight, and it was a very close fight, things like that. But Alexander Volkanovski is very good at letting the fight be fought at his pace, how he wants it, things like that. Because he's content with point fighting, which MMA community, fans, things like that, they seem to say that as the insult. But guys, the object, which I'm a hypocrite of that too, because I think Israel Adesanya is a tremendously boring fighter lately, especially in that Robert Whittaker fight. But I think that I say that also because he's kind of douchey about it outside the cage. He's like, oh, you're supposed to be coming and taking your belt from me, you know, things like that. It's like, okay, dude. But at the end of the day, the objective is to win. Doesn't matter how you get it done. The objective is to walk out of that arena with that belt, with your hand raised and with a fat paycheck. You don't get that paycheck unless you win, and you don't get those bigger paychecks unless you got that belt, and you got to do it by any means necessary. Now, I'm not saying do a Derek Lewis versus Francis Ngannou. I'm not saying do a Damian Maia versus Anderson Silva, but when Alexander Volkanovski is called a point fighter, that's not really an insult. To me, I think that's having very good fight IQ, knowing what to do to win no matter what. You know, maybe the fans are booing you, but if you can tune that out and still fight your fight, I think that shows very good mental strength and very good ability to stick to a fight plan, a game plan. You know what I'm saying? And let's be real, Alexander Volkanovski looks unstoppable at 145. He's on a 20-fight win streak. He has only lost once in his career, and that was at welterweight. He's never lost at featherweight, and I just don't think this is the fight that he loses. If there is someone he is gonna lose to, it's probably Max Holloway, but I think he beats Max Holloway a third time. I think Alexander Volkanovski is on his way to the solidified featherweight GOAT. I think he's already there, in my opinion, but to others, I think it's going to take a couple more title defenses for people to see that. And I think this is just another gem to the belt. You know what I mean? No disrespect to the Korean Zombie. He is legit. He's got legit submissions. He's got legit coaches. He's got legit game plans, things like that. But when you walk down Korean Zombie like Brian Ortega did, and you don't let Korean Zombie have his way in a fight, he kind of just finds himself following you the whole fight. And I think that's what Alexander Volkanovski is going to make Korean Zombie do. So I got Alexander Volkanovski winning by decision. I don't think he's going to knock the Korean Zombie out, and I really don't think he's going to submit him. He's only got 3 submissions in his career. He doesn't really actively go for submissions. So I got Alexander Volkanovski by decision. So those are my UFC 273 fight picks. Let me know for these 4 fights, which one are you the most excited for? Or if there's one that you're the most excited for and I didn't include, let me know what it is in the comments down below. Who are your predictions? I'd love to know that as well. Thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed, you know how YouTube works. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, all that junk. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye, guys.